All right, thanks. Well, hi everyone. I recognize quite a few names here. Feel free to turn your cameras on. We'd love to see your beautiful faces. My name is Lee Eisen, and I'm the EVP and CEO of AIA San Diego. We are the San Diego chapter of the American Institute of Architects, which is a long-standing organization championing the power of architecture and design to make market changes in the built environment and in our lives. AIA architects make an impactful difference in our world, from designing great communities to creating hospitable spaces to prescribing the details which make a home or a hospital room or a restroom more accommodating. AIA as an organization believes that access to quality design is a right, and that we as architects are the agents of change to make that a reality. And as an organization and as practitioners, we champion diversity, inclusion, and justice. We are thrilled to say that AIA San Diego is celebrating LGBTQ plus and Pride this month and really all year long. So be sure to follow us on Instagram at AIA San Diego and on our website, aiasandiego.org, and follow along as we promote a new series of featuring local sites in San Diego with connections to LGBTQ Pride. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome my esteemed colleague, Jamie Intervallo. Jamie is a project manager at LPA, and she serves on AIA San Diego's board of directors and heads up equity, diversity, inclusion, and justice, a new function for our board of directors this year. Jamie?
Hi, Lee. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. As Lee shared, as part of our Pride series, AIA San Diego wanted to also include a technical workshop that takes a deeper dive into how inclusivity can be accounted for in design for bathrooms as well. As citizen architects, we should not forget that politics around bathroom design has been mirrored in fear through the decades. Just over 50 years ago, bathrooms were still segregated by race. The discussion around LGBTQ plus community and bathroom design became a hotter topic in the 80s with the AIDS epidemic. 10 years later, the legislation was just passed to create the American Disabilities Act, removing barriers for accessible folks. And now today, the discussion is hot again on how we can create more inclusivity design around the LGBT communities, especially within the bathrooms. So today we're going to review how bathroom designs can remove barriers for yet another American citizen, accounting for age, gender, race, and beyond. As a famous Slovenian philosopher says, as soon as you flush the toilet, you're in the middle of ideology. This discussion will revolve around design alternatives between binary separated bathrooms and a more human-centered design inclusive for all. And it's our pleasure to introduce our very esteemed colleagues, Jeff Katz, Architecture, who will be presenting the workshop today. Jeff Katz is joining us, Christy Drake, who's also with our WIA committee, and Melina Villanueva from Jeff Katz Architecture as well. Just one final housekeeping reminder. Today, everyone will be receiving CEU and HSW credits. To receive those credits, please email your appropriate name and AIA number and email to MJ Carrion. See her email in the chat box that we'll share now. Everyone will receive their credits to be able to submit for CEUs. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Christy Drake, who will be talking about the Jeff Katz team. Christy?
I'm actually going to throw it to Jeff first. He's going to introduce the company and tell us a little bit about what we do.
Thank you, Christy. So for those of you who aren't familiar with JKA, we are about a 30-person firm. Our main office is here in San Diego. We do have an office in Northern California as well, in Santa Rosa. In the 30 years that JK has been operating here in San Diego, we've focused primarily on public sector work, community centers, libraries, parks, fire stations. We do work for SeaWorld and for Logoland, and San Diego Humane Society is a longtime client as well. And in all of these projects, we are obviously incorporating restrooms into the design of those facilities. And Christy, if you want to go to the next slide, one of the main features that we started many years ago with fire stations was the understanding that the fire service was evolving from a predominantly male profession to male and females operating in the fire station at the same time. And so incorporating single user restrooms was a way to address the gender issues. Issues isn't really the right word, gender opportunities in the fire station, as well as to account for sexual identity as well, and not creating any sort of discomfort for the personnel that were working in the station. And so we have taken some of the same design approaches with the fire station, incorporated into other projects as well. I would say that as architects and as individuals, you know, we understand these issues academically, and then when things happen in our own world that make these issues a little bit closer to home, we understand them on a different level. And for me, this was particularly evident ago when a family member came out as a trans woman, and through conversations, you know, was certainly able to understand some of the challenges that she faced on a regular basis going through that transition process. So JK is happy to
team is Melanie and Haley are our co-chairs, and I don't think they're on the call now, but they wanted to, is a very exciting event that we're doing. We're doing a mentorship program, and that's something that in our first kickoff meeting of the year, everybody wanted a mentorship. So we're calling the gender neutral workshop presentation. Information, some design already, and just to talk about how it was first, it was segregated with the race. There are some laws that tried to happen with weren't the gender that and in silencing that. In 2016, California passed the Equal Restroom Access Act, and that simply meant that if you had a single user restroom, it's now considered a gender neutral restroom. It's not required to have one in there in your building, but if you have a single user, it is gender neutral. And then this year, pretty exciting, in the IBC and the IPC, there's now group gender neutral restrooms that are being recognized in there. That's not in CBC yet, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. So who benefits from gender neutral design? First and foremost, transgender people, because there is such a lack of safe and secure public restroom options for them here. And it is really doing a lot of harm to them as individuals individuals and as a and that it's really anyone who doesn't feel that they fit the socially constructed mold of a man or a woman. And that ideology can start as soon as 4 and 5 years old. So just imagine the pain that people go through their whole life. So we just want to make sure that we're bringing awareness to the topic and making necessary changes as we can. Families with small children, if a father took his daughter to a football game and had to use the restroom, it's hard to bring her in, but also don't want to leave her out because that's dangerous. So that a gender neutral or a family room is good for that. Any areas where there's unnecessary lineups, typically it's the women's line that's longer. Caregivers of opposite sex, and when it's been done in some schools, there's a school in Portland that this is done in, that the kids like it, and the teachers have talked about how it's actually reduced the amount of bullying because it's all open and there's more people that are watching, and so it's not happening. And then we're going to also touch a little bit on locker rooms and shower rooms. So really, it will benefit anybody with body image issues or anxiety issues that they don't feel comfortable changing in front of anyone, regardless of gender, sex, race, what have you. So the drawbacks, some of them, are the obvious ones: the heated political debates, people saying that they don't have enough privacy, that it's this perceived lack of safety, and then the stuff that actually makes sense for us is that it could be more expensive. So we'll touch a little bit on all of that as well. So I just wanted to also, with the heated political debates, there's been a misunderstanding with gender as binary or as the same as sex, and sex refers to and intersex are the most common examples of that. And then gender refers to the characteristics, and that's the social norms, the behaviors, things that they're learned after birth. So I think that understanding that is a part of the awareness. And when people don't really don't have the same gender identity as their sex assigned at birth, that's kind of when we run into these issues. And that's what we're trying to help kind of solve as we're talking through this today. So the AIA, IBC, and CBC kind of defines all gender as applicable to everyone, all genders, no restrictions. There's unisex in IBC, and CBC is also single user or family. So all three of those are kind of the same thing. So all gender neutral is one, and then unisex, single user, and family is something else. So the other benefits to doing inclusive restrooms are that it's more efficient with space. So we have a couple space saving diagrams that we just want to flip through to show you. On the left here, we have a typical 8-fixture segregated male-female layout. And on the right, we're showing how that could be renovated or redesigned to be a all gender group restroom. And you're saving about 50, 60 square feet if you're starting from scratch or remodel. And if it was going to be a renovation of that same space, you could do it and leave all your plumbing in the same place, et cetera, et cetera. If you have the privilege of starting from scratch with new construction, then you can consider using all single user restrooms, and that would, you know, give you the more privacy. So just something to note with this though is when you have the single user restrooms and they're clustered, 50% of them have to be accessible. So when you have the group rooms like this, it's 10%, and when you have the group single users, that's up to 50%. So I'm going to hand it over to Melina now. She's going to talk us through some design tips.
Thanks, Christy. So yeah, now we'll take a look at some more specific design elements. So this first one here are full height partitions, and these full height partitions and doors can be a good option to help with privacy. And as you can see by some of the examples here, they can come in a variety of colors and finish options, as well as built-in occupied hardware for privacy. And they also don't require a floor drain for each stall, making this a good option for renovations and more flexible projects. And then another option we have here are fully framed walls. So these are basically just individual little rooms with standard doors on them. And these can provide even more privacy than full height partitions with better sound and smell separation. But typically these end up becoming more expensive with additional floor drains. So a floor drain and ventilation for each stall. And then for lavatories, we have an option. We have options to include centralized fixtures, and these can be more efficient. But we can also do private lavs with stalls for more privacy. And shared locker areas with individuals changing stalls allow for shared space while still providing privacy. But something to consider with these shared spaces is having the entrances to each of the stalls visible from the public space for increased security, just because this is definitely a lot more open than your traditional block.
Okay, I'm gonna pick it up at the fun one with the urinals. So this is still quite the hot topic, is about how best to implement urinals into gender neutral restroom design, and the answer is really up to your use. So we're showing 3 different options here. You can have a bank of urinals, which you would want to put kind of around the corner, not in sight line of the rest of the restroom, but it can still be in the same space. Or you could have urinals in their own stalls, or you could have a urinal in the same stall or room as the water closet. And so I think as long as you're providing the proper signage, what they're getting themselves into, I think that's the key with this one. So this was the 2016 CBC Equal Restroom Access Act that I mentioned before. We just want to make sure that now we have the geometric symbol on the door. It's a triangle over a circle, and the pictograms, while they're not required, lots of businesses tend to use them, and in very creative and interesting ways. It's always best to check with the local code official for the final determination whether they want the pictograms or not. And if you're going to do something like these, then you should probably make sure that your code official has somewhat of a sense of humor. Okay, so this was the interesting part with IBC. So this isn't relevant for California. Hopefully not. Hopefully it's just a yet. But if you're working on federal projects, or if you're working on anything out of state, this could apply to you, so you can utilize that. So we're adding in the number 5 is pretty similar to the 2016 Equal Restroom Access Act. So that's not really that interesting for us. But number 6, this is the one where they're not required to be designated by sex or gender, where rooms have water closets and lavatories, and that's in a group setting. And the IPC, they're now not calculating by segregated. You still can, but if you are providing the group gender neutral restrooms, then you calculate 100%, and then the ICC A17.1 will give them the final counts of what fixtures are required. In the example over here, they're not showing any urinals, but if there is a project that would fall under requirements to have them, then each urinal that's provided needs to be located within a stall, the required ones. If you're providing extra, then they can be in a bank outside. And so we're not going to bore you with all of the code stuff that most of you have probably already seen a million times. So instead, we're going to provide a pretty detailed handout, and we can email that to you later, and that'll be with some code references and diagrams from barrier-free ADA requirements. So now we will get into the case studies. We're talking about 2 animal facilities now. So the first one is an adoptions staff and volunteer restroom and locker room remodel. And the second one is an animal shelter staff restroom and locker room remodel. In both cases, we wanted to push for the gender neutral layout. And in the first one, it eventually got denied, which I'm about to go through. And then in the second one, they didn't really have an issue with it. So that's pretty cool. So we're working on trying to be the advocates for changing those social norms. So this is just a quick snippet of what the existing plan looks like. In the upper right, that's the overall floor plan. And then this is the enlarged existing conditions that they have now. So they have some locker rooms and 2 showers and men and women's toilets and sinks. And so for the renovation, what they were wanting to include is a lactation room, a single user restroom accessible from the hallway, and they have too many lockers for men and not enough lockers for women. They wanted to keep at least 2 showers, but potentially add 3. So those were our constraints. This is showing 12 of 17, I think, options that we provided for them. So the ones with the pink and the blue, those are the segregated genders. And then the ones that show the green, those are the gender neutral options. And I just picked a few that I think would be good to show. And so I'll flip through some of them now. We kind of went from, okay, let's try not to change where the plumbing is as much as possible. So this one is kind of showing that one. This one adds in a little more plumbing, but it also tries to keep it in that central zone. And we're adding some changing stalls out in the locker room area. And then this one tries to push the restrooms over to one side and the locker room over to the other side, while we're adding 2 additional restrooms from the corridor along with that lactation room. Another option, keeping that plumbing wall along the exterior wall and maintaining the 2 existing showers relatively in their same locations, and and then we have a couple of men and women's options that we left in there. One would give them all single user restrooms, and then the other one would keep it pretty similar to what they have, and just kind of give them what they need, taking the space away from men's and adding in the lactation room and the other required one. So what they ended up doing was they sent out a survey to their staff and volunteers to see how accepting everyone would be of this change from the segregated locker rooms and toilet rooms to a gender neutral switch. And so there were 101 responses, 75 people gave positive yeses and positive responses, and only 26 gave negatives. So this was pretty exciting. They were all for it. They were excited that this is the next step, that they're being inclusive and mindful of other people's gender identities. And some people are a little hesitant, but they're like, you know what, this is cool, it'll work as long as it's all private. And then I thought this last one was nice, because most people are more inclined to say, oh, I don't want to change in front of someone else. And this person said, well, if I change, am I going to make other people uncomfortable? So I thought that was nice to share. And then we have some of the negative ones, and most of them were, I don't want to change in front of the opposite sex or the opposite gender, or a gender that's not mine. And so these were three that I picked out to share with you. The first one is a little lengthy, a little wordy, but it at the end, it comes down to they don't think it's practical in their workplace at this time. And I mean, coming from an outside perspective and even internally, this was a little bit, well, I don't know. I think this person is just using that as an excuse in all of these other ones. So that was kind of interesting. And then this last one is the reason why they ended up denying all of the gender neutral options. And that's because this person said that she would feel, or they would feel unsafe because they're a victim of abuse, and it would, in turn, provide this person with the same harm as other people who have issues with their gender identity, not issues, but discrepancies with the social norms with their gender identities, and make them feel unsafe. And if some people hold off on going to the restroom all day because they feel uncomfortable, then there are health issues that come along with that. And that's been another big study. So this is the final approved plan, which was kind of the most boring one. They kept it pretty similar, but anyway, the whole process is really why we wanted to share this with you. And it's just trying to advocate to the client and try to get them to talk to their end users. So now I'm going to flip it over to Melina, and she can talk about our second case study.
Yeah, so this case study also happens to be for an animal care facility, staff areas, and what was provided in the existing facilities were separate men's and women's. They had a little locker room area, showers, and restrooms. And although we already had an accessible path to get to these areas, both the restrooms and the showers were not accessible, so that was something to consider. And then we also had some structural and plumbing constraints to consider. But ultimately for this project, the client was open to this more gender neutral layout, and this is kind of where we landed. And so if we take a look at this kind of final configuration, you can see that we we ended up relocating all of the plumbing fixtures, but since this is part of a larger project, we felt that it was worth it to achieve a more inclusive space. And you can kind of see here, we tried to keep the plumbing fixtures away from our existing CMU walls. And this red portion here is an existing shear wall that we couldn't really touch. But besides that, we tried to create, well, we did create individual spaces for kind of each use. So we have showers and changing rooms, and then we have restrooms, and then in this locker area that's kind of open to everyone. And I guess we're showing benches in the locker area, something we typically always do, but something to consider could be to provide, or I guess to provide less benches, or to not provide benches except where it's required, to kind of discourage changing in this area. As if you recall, one of Christy's example feedbacks was someone just being a little concerned about changing in front of, making other people uncomfortable, or people themselves being uncomfortable, and so kind of discouraging changing in this area and just keeping that to the individual private spaces. That's all I got, Christy.
Okay, there we go. I was trying to find my mute. Yeah, so thank you, Melina. That is the end of our presentation, and we tried to speed through that as fast as we could while still being informative. And now we want to open it up to the floor. We have a couple of, we have lots of time to talk about if you guys have any questions, if you want to share any stories. And then we also have the opportunity to kind of sketch some charrettes. I have Bluebeam open on my computer, and you can take control of my mouse and keyboard. And if you wanted to kind of draw your ideas. Does anyone have any questions?
Christy, this is Jamie. I actually had a question. For the survey questions in your first project example, were you able to help the client kind of craft those and kind of guide them on how you could lead that? And was that a part of your design services to help lead those discussions, or was that all led by the client?
Unfortunately, it was all led by the client. And one of the positive comments actually came back and said that they thought that if there was more information given to them, that they think that more people would be open to the idea, instead of just kind of, you know, giving them the why, not really just saying, hey, would you be okay with this? So unfortunately, no, we weren't included in coming up with the questions.
You could have used the slides today to kind of lead them to the water.
Yeah, I know.
We have one question for the audience for you, Christy and team, from Rachel Case at Steinbert Hart. She asked, did the client who approved the gender neutral approach get feedback before or after from their employees?
So not after. It's not under construction yet. So, but beforehand, everyone was pretty open to it. In fact, well, the reason they kind of wanted it was because, you know, they have staff that aren't, I'm not sure exactly specifics, but they have staff that would definitely benefit from gender neutral restrooms and locker areas. And the other, sorry, I'm reading the question number 2. Is there any pushback from the city on this approach? So this is this portion of the building is a business occupancy. we don't have fully gender neutral restrooms for the assembly use area, so I'm actually not sure how that would affect that.
Melina, follow-on question for me. Has your office done any of the new IPC approved group gender neutral bathroom designs yet?
Not yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd say yes.
Yeah,
I've not either. I think that's really, really new. I'm glad you guys
pretty,
shared.
it's quite new, so not yet, but hopefully near future.
Mm-hmm. Christy, did you want to bring up your drawing to get maybe some charrette ideas started? I think it'll be kind of fun. We have a great group of designers here.
Sure. Yes, let me open up. All right, can you all see the blue beam, or are you still seeing the PowerPoint?
We can see your blue beam.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I have just some little blocks for you guys to use if you want to, or you can use the boxes and the lines. But if anybody wants to talk out an idea of how we could lay out a gender neutral restroom, if you have had any ideas since we've been talking today, that would be great.
I was just chatting with Laura Shin in the chat, who may share an idea or a question. Laura?
Well, it's actually more of an observation. I mean, I was actually quite surprised when I traveled in the Middle East about, I don't know how many years ago it was, when we went to Tunisia, which is a fairly conservative country. It's ostensibly a secular country, but is also very traditional in their observance of Islam. And so one of the things as being at a university that always kind of, I feel attention is that, that there are folks that want and need to have the gender neutral option, but there are also folks that are always going to feel uncomfortable with that and want and need to have a gendered option. And so in an ideal world, you sort of provide all of those. And yet I found when I was traveling in Tunisia that it was surprising how many restrooms were actually shared. You would go into one room, the stalls were almost floor to ceiling, like there was maybe just a couple inches at the bottom and all you could see were the bottom of shoes, and you'd have to be like super tall and standing on something to see over the top, and even then you'd only get a slice of a view. And interestingly enough, the stalls did have gender symbols on them, but then all the sinks were together. And I think just sort of traveling and experiencing that, it made me realize that, maybe there is more kind of a range of ability to accept that than we think. But I do think we have to still consider, particularly in a place like a university where you are likely to have folks from all over, and probably will have folks who have experiences similar to the person at the animal facility, that need to have that in that sense, the single user restroom that provides for all of your needs in one room that is a separate discrete room that you can lock the door, may be an option that we'll want to preserve all the time, even if we provide more flexible spaces for congregate restrooms. So it's just kind of a thought and an observation that I've had. I think it's sort of a balancing act, and it really depends on your constituency. Obviously, in a business building, you have a discrete set of employees and you can work with them. But in something like a library on a college campus, you don't necessarily know who all of your customers are going to be, at least not at a discrete level. You know them as general groups of people with general status in the university, and that's about it.
Mm-hmm. Laura, this is Jamie. Follow-on question for me as your role at the university. What is the university's stance on gender-neutral restrooms right now for SDSU campus?
We put them in all new buildings, but we've been doing them frequently. We've been doing them as a single, separate, self-contained restroom because of that concern that we know there will be people who don't want to be in a gender mixed restroom. Where we have done, in a couple of cases, we have done multiple stall gender neutral restrooms, and those were done in our student health center and in our library, and they were additive. So what we did, and actually one of the ways that we got the funding kind of allocated, was we made them accessible. So they're accessible because they have to be anyway, they're new restrooms. And so they were an accessible gender neutral restroom that then, you know, even though the building had rooms that were usable by people with disabilities, the accessibility code is so constantly changing that it gave us an opportunity to also update them to the absolute latest codes and requirements for accessibility. So in the student health center, we have 2-stall gender neutral, and we have a 2-stall gender neutral in the library, but it's right next to a men's and a women's. So we didn't take away any men's and women's. We repurposed a janitor's closet and expanded it. And so we were able to use the plumbing from that. It was still fairly expensive, but you know, definitely worth it when we could show that it not only met the need for gender neutral, but it also met the need for an additional accessible in a very heavily used space. And honestly, adding to the fixture count in that library space, which was one of our 24/7 study spaces, was not a problem at all, because there are so many students in those spaces during exam time. Not so much over the last year, but there will be next fall. We will have lots of people again.
Thank you for sharing. It's always interesting because universities always push on those concepts often first. So nice to hear. Christy, we've received, and Melina, we've received a couple more questions in the chat. First one from Kotaro Nakamura. Does the plumbing code allow gender neutral rooms? How did you comply?
So the CPC 2019 doesn't recognize group gender neutral restrooms or group gender neutral locker rooms, but there isn't really a distinct separation between that, because it's not in locker rooms. You're splitting up the showers by 50%, and if you were to do gender neutral, then it would be 100. So you would still be complying with the same amount of fixtures, with the correct amount of fixtures. But in our cases, for both of our case studies, we actually were providing single user restrooms within an open locker room. And the showers were in most cases either in their own rooms with solid doors, or they were inside of the restroom. So that's how we kind of complied with code and didn't really have to address anything that was technically gender neutral or outside of the realm of CBC and CPC.
Thank you. I have another question here from Mr. Kevin DeFreitas. In larger facilities that require numerous fixture counts and gender neutral area restrooms take up considerably more area to accommodate. Have your clients pushed back on the higher associated costs?
So I think I'll answer for both of the case studies, and Melina, if I miss anything, then you can chime in. So in both of the cases, the remodels are very expensive, and so the tearing up a little bit more of the slab to move some plumbing in the grand scheme of things wasn't that big of a deal. But if it was just a locker room redesign, I think that would have a big impact. And it did for the case study that I shared, that one specifically, we are a little over budget, or we always are, right? And so once they got the surveys back and they were saying, okay, well, maybe this is where we can save some money, and we don't have to do as much of the value engineering at the later on. So I think that cost is a driver, and I think if you can work it into a larger remodel, that helps. Did I answer all those questions? Or pushback from the city. So I don't think it's gone. I know the one that I shared isn't gender neutral anymore. But the one that Melina was working on, that one hasn't gone to the city yet, right, Melina? Right. Okay. So there hasn't been any pushback yet, but it sounds like Laura might be able to chime in on that aspect. Are you familiar with any pushback from the city on gender neutral approaches?
Or at the university?
Yeah, we don't permit through the city, so no.
I
I
was
will
gonna
say
right,
though,
of course,
I will
yeah.
say that I have observed in my co-working buddy who works at Gensler, I've observed him trying really hard to get gender neutral restrooms that the client wanted through the city, and being denied multiple times because they didn't meet their fixture counts because they simply weren't counting the gender neutral. So I think in that particular case, I think they ended up not using a multi-stall, but they ended up using the single stall individual restrooms, and they simply labeled them as, you know, unisex or whatever, or labeled them as men and women, and then said, once you have your certificate of occupancy, you can put whatever signage you want on the restrooms. So it was interesting. I think that's how they worked it out with the client, because it was a TI for a client that was really interested in doing that. And the client was very frustrated, and Steve was very frustrated, but it was just like banging his head against a brick wall. And I said, you know, you need to find somebody that needs a gender neutral restroom to sue the city, and that would get them to change. Maybe that's what it'll take to get them to change their tune. But
that's a very good point. I like
yeah,
that.
I'm kind of surprised that hasn't happened, actually. Although admittedly over the last year, admittedly over the last year, we've certainly had lots of other more, I guess, life-threatening reasons to, you know, be worried about marginalized communities. So maybe once we get back to what resembles a little bit more of a normal life, that, you know, folks will start to kind of rethink some of these policies that inhibit this inclusivity. So yeah, so, and that's just anecdotal, and it's just literally from overhearing him, because we've been working from home literally about 5 feet next to each other in the study.
There are some benefits to that, right?
Yes, there are a few.
I think in our office too, I've been lucky to have, you know, a great mix of clients, and some of my more open-minded clients have started to look into it, but often it does come down to cost. And if, you know, you're going to take that into account on top of everything else they have to do with the renovation, it's one of the first things to get removed. But I think that you guys have had great luck getting your clients on board with the idea and fitting it into the project. So probably ahead of the game. We have another comment from Rachel again from Steinbart Hart. She shared that I've tried to do this in restaurants, and I'm hopeful that the IPC changes will force cities to accept the combined approach. Rachel, if you want to come off mute and share some more on that story, that sounds very interesting.
Yeah, I'm actually relatively new to California, but just coming from Washington, D.C., have tried to do this, and depending on what reviewer you get, some of them will accept the single stall approach, and some of them really insist that, you know, the IPC calls for separate male and female. It's, but I'm hopeful with the IPC changes that they'll recognize that we don't necessarily require separate gendered restrooms.
So there's a couple of restaurants and bars in downtown San Diego that Christy and Melina and I were talking about before preparing for the presentation today. One of them is a hotel in downtown, and I actually myself didn't know that it was a gender neutral restroom. And I think that I'm pretty open-minded, kind of left-wingy architect-y type, but I did walk in and I thought they were just normal single stalls, and I got out and I looked up and I saw a guy, and I was just like, just that moment of like, oh, did I walk in the wrong one? And then I'm like, wait, it's okay. They're full height. It's fine. And it was just the gang labs. And I think more than anything, we're all creatures of habit. And like you said, we haven't seen it. It's not really standard yet, and there's not a lot of great case study examples, although Kevin just shared that there's a cool one that's going to be in stone in Liberty Station.
Yeah, Stone Brewery and Liberty Station. Now it is, the rooms with the toilets are separated, but that's a common sink area. Right. And I don't know how they got away with that, honestly, but it might be because it was sort of looked separate enough on the plan, and they didn't highlight the fact that there was this common sink area, and maybe they thought there was a wall in between, even though it's really an opening. So it's possible that the drawings just weren't that explicit, and it wasn't kind of
slipped
caught.
it in.
Yeah, but yeah, it's cool. It's very cool, and you're right. Even though I don't worry about things like that, still, it was not something that we're used to in our daily lives. We're so used to the segregated restrooms that when we see a mix of genders, it is startling. And even if, I feel bad because it's like, I don't want to be startled, but I think that speaks to how ingrained that is in our building codes and our standards and our precedents, unfortunately.
Agree. There's an interesting comment in our chat from Haresh. You might have to come on unmute and share this, Haresh, because several people here, including myself, will freak out that you did a restroom for JayZ and Beyonce. The comment is, I did have an experience of a gender neutral restroom for JayZ and Beyonce's 40/40 Club in Atlantic City. This was in 2005, and the permits were handled by the Trenton office. They did not permit this. Haresh, can you come on mute and share why? What happened?
So that was a long time ago, and JayZ and the 40/40 Club kind of were this kind of place where people mingle the opposite sex in the same restrooms. And so it did not, we discussed this with the city. I was in charge of the permitting process that time, trying to get the city to buy off, but they said they were kind of throwing up instances. No, you need so many labs and so many this, but we cannot permit gender neutral restrooms as such. So eventually we had to drop the idea.
Oh, you could have had Beyonce come in to plan check and be like, excuse me.
Yeah.
I think that you should push this through.
That might have actually worked. I don't know. Maybe, nothing else seems to work with code officials. Maybe that would just like make them so speechless that they just sign the permit and be done with it.
I would.
Like, I would too.
Whatever you want.
The Trenton office was a pain to work with. So
so interesting. You should still, I would love to see those designs. I'm going to email you after.
And I think actually, now that I think about it, it's too bad he's actually away. He's on a field trip today, but I think Steve mentioned that they had actually done successfully a project with gender neutral. And so it was really more a matter of the very strict interpretation by one particular plans examiner. And so it can even vary from one to the other, which I think is I mean, it's always unfortunate when that happens, regardless of what the issue is, because I think it just makes it that much more challenging it's already a challenging enough process to make sure that you've got everything done correctly. And then when you have differing interpretations, and then when you're trying to do something new and innovative, and one person sort of lets it slide, or at least gives you a little bit of leeway, and then somebody else just says, absolutely not, you can't count any of those, you get 0 for those. Like, okay.
We have to be the change. We as citizen architects have to represent and be the change. So I wanted to thank everyone from JKA Architecture for preparing this amazing presentation, most especially Ms. Christy Drake with the WIA committee, and Melina as well. You've all inspired us. We really hope that all of our firms get to pursue these type of projects and be the change as citizen architects we all hope to be. We are almost out of time. We'll be respectful for everyone's time today. Thank you so much for attending our workshop. And again, please make sure you send your email to MJ Carrions, who is the contact information is in the chat, to make sure you get your HSW and CEU credit for today. So with that, we'll say thank you so much.
And the handout that
go ahead.
that we put together.
Yep.
So yeah, when you send your email, we have a 38-page reference document that we put together for you guys.
That's
So
correct.
when you're designing some restrooms, little cheat sheet, all the code sections you need, and some sections from the ADA.
I definitely will have that in my back pocket. Everyone who registered for the event will receive that as well. So yes, thank you, Christy and team. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, all.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.